At low levels of obligation, attention remains flexible. It can move between present demands and future positioning without friction. This flexibility creates the illusion that clear thinking is a stable personal trait. But clarity is not stable. It is conditional on how much of your attention is already claimed before you begin thinking. Every financial obligation occupies cognitive space. It does not wait passively in the background. It competes for attention, even when nothing is immediately due. As obligations accumulate, this competition intensifies. Attention begins to prioritize what cannot be delayed. Urgency quietly overrides importance. This shift does not feel like a loss of clarity. It feels like responsibility. It feels like focus. It feels like doing what must be done. But the structure of that focus has changed. It is no longer expansive. It is compressed around immediate constraints. When attention compresses, time horizons contract. Decisions are evaluated based on short-term stability rather than long-term positioning. The future becomes harder to simulate with precision. This is where clarity begins to collapse. Not because the individual is incapable, but because the conditions required for clear thinking are no longer present. Strategic thinking depends on unused attention. It requires cognitive surplus, not just intelligence. Without surplus, thinking becomes reactive rather than directional. As obligations rise, surplus disappears. What remains is a constant need to maintain existing structures. Maintenance replaces exploration. This creates a subtle but consistent pattern. The more financially committed someone becomes, the less cognitive space they have to question those commitments. The system reinforces itself. Obligations demand attention, and attention prevents the reevaluation of obligations. This is why the collapse of clarity often goes unnoticed. There is no single moment where thinking deteriorates. There is only a gradual narrowing of what can be considered. Options that require long-term thinking begin to feel impractical, not because they are impossible, but because they cannot compete with immediate demands for attention. This produces a specific kind of blindness. Not the absence of intelligence, but the absence of available attention to deploy it. Under these conditions, decisions become structurally predictable. They favor continuity over change, stability over repositioning, and immediacy over optimization. The individual experiences this as rational behavior. Each decision makes sense within the constraints they are operating under. But the constraints themselves are rarely examined. They are treated as fixed, even when they are the source of the limitation. This is how financial pressure reshapes cognition without appearing to do so. It does not distort thinking directly. It restricts what thinking can access. As a result, clarity is not lost randomly. It is systematically reduced in proportion to the weight of obligations being carried. The more attention is required to sustain the present, the less attention remains to design the future. This is why clarity often appears highest before commitments deepen. Not because conditions were easier, but because attention was less constrained. Once obligations reach a certain threshold, the system stabilizes around maintenance. At that point, clear strategic thinking becomes increasingly rare. Not due to lack of capability, but due to lack of available cognitive space. Clarity collapses under financial pressure not as a side effect, but as a structural outcome of how attention is allocated. Want to see the hidden rules shaping money, power, and human behavior? Subscribe to Unseen Forces.